So I'll open it up for some questions.
Hello, David. My name is Suraj. Thank you for that presentation. I wanted to follow up on your points about cognition. And I think drawing from cognitive anthropology, you had terms such as distributed cognition and so on. The idea about the individual versus kind of a shared construction of cognition. So in that context, many cognitive anthropologists use this term of cultural schemas and how schemas kind of are culturally shared and constructed, but installed in the individual, right? And the reason I'm kind of suggesting that, in addition, maybe to the distributed cognition concept, is how does one understand, for example, what we've been discussing last couple of days in the seminar, the fact that there is so much emphasis on English, right? Now, there are many pathways to explain that. There's a political economy explanation, but there's also a discursive, probably schematic explanation. Similarly, how teachers think of, kind of teaching to the test, right? And that kind of, where can we use schema and it is shared, right? It is distributed cognition. So any thoughts on how does one understand some of these practices, because they are installed in the individual, but there's clearly what the language you used, distributed cognition, but I would say cultural schemas in the making. Often these schemas are contradictory as well. So yeah, just your thoughts on that.
So thank you very much. Yeah.
Take one more question from Lina, and then you can answer both of them.
Hello, David. I'm Leena from the English and Foreign Languages University in the south of India, Hyderabad. Thank you for that wonderful presentation where concepts as heavy as culture, mind, and history, including cognition, you gave us a fantastic overview in a summarized format, and it was like like in a nutshell, we could get the framework, and we could also start analyzing how it is related to our respective fields. So I am a teacher educator and also an applied linguist. And I have been working with young Indian children from very challenging contexts in terms of their social class, economic resources, lack of parental education, nutrition at home, etc., etc. So I would like to make an observation. So you gave us a binary between orality and literacy, and you gave us at 2 points in your presentation, you made this statement that oral cultures are, as opposed to literate cultures, more into narration and not into abstract, theoretical formulation. So I don't know whether you have, when you were in Kerala, if you had the chance to, look at Indian architecture, which is permeated by different religions and different castes, so on and so forth. But if we look closely at temple architecture or, the kind of forts that would have been built up during the Mughal Empire, so on and so forth. So literacy is a very recent phenomenon, but human civilization from its, I wouldn't be able to comment whether from day one, but oracy has been at the heart of human civilization for ages together, right? I don't think anybody would disagree with me on that, whereas literacy is a more recent phenomenon. And so if we look at things like architecture, and the kind of architecture that used to be done at that point of time, I'm talking about thousands of years back, and the symmetry, the geometrical symmetry that was in practice, which we can look at if we look at temple architecture or other, Indian architecture, and I'm sure this is applicable in other global contexts as well. So mathematics was at the heart of it, and this was not written, and this was handed down over generations, and we really don't know how that happened. So I don't think it's right for us to conclude that oral cultures are not they're more narrative oriented and they are not capable of theoretical abstract thinking. And my second example comes from, a student I was just talking to my scholars today that he is till date one of my best students who was visually impaired, and the kind of memory he had with data sets. So he had to leave his PhD in the middle and he had to go back for some other. So after 2-3 years, when he came back, he used to remember the data set he was working on and he was about to submit the previous time. So, and it was all a matter of oral cognition in his mind. Of course, he was brilliant. He was literate, but a lot of it was in the mind. So I would like to just step back and request you to consider what you said. Thank you.
Okay. David, over to you for both these questions.
All right, thank you very much. The internet did die for a minute there, but I think the question I've understood entirely. So both of them. So let me deal with cultural schemas and distributed cognition first of all. I mean, I think it's absolutely right. And cultural schemas, as you say, what we learn, and they ultimately are absorbed by young people as practices, as ways of doing, ways of understanding. They come with rules and expectations of how we do things here, whether they are in our individual homes, our individual schools, our societies, and so on. These cultural schemas, as you say, become part of us, and they mediate our actions and activities. Of course, the tacit expectation is that we do learn, we do absorb, these cultural schemas do become part of who we are. I think my point really about cognitive distribution is really about what is it that we look at to understand individual or societal progress or innovation. If we look at the extent to which we have learned the cultural script wherever it is shaped, have we learned it well? Have we learned the rules well? Have we learned to understand? Can we do as the cultural script suggests we do? We're still looking at the idea of cognition or development or innovation, etc., from the point of view of a metrics that allows a judgment to be made about how well that cultural script is learned. The idea of distributed cognition and many other terms that have arisen over time is actually that the unit of analysis, what we look at to understand learning and cognition and innovation, thought, and so on, shifts away from the individual, and the unit of analysis no longer becomes how well we've learned the script, how well we've learned the formula, how well we've learned the language, etc. It is actually what are we collectively capable of as a unit or as a society, and so on. So I'll come to the second question, but they sort of interrelated. I think the most significant contribution of young Indian minds in the global context is seen in Silicon Valley and STEM activities throughout the United States, in big industry, big commercial, big IT units and companies, and how well one speaks English, how well one has learned the script and so on, is not really the question that determines success or productivity, etc. It is actually the ability to function in ways that are culturally appropriate and relevant in new formations. So scientists in Silicon Valley, whether they're from China, India, as so often they are, the United Kingdom, the United States, or Germany, they work together in teams, and different ways of making meaning. Some ways of making meaning is through understanding oral scripts. Other ways of making meaning are through visual perceptions and acuity. This shouldn't go there because it doesn't seem, it seems that it would unbalance the space rocket or whatever it is. So these very acute judgments made on what I would call a perceptual literacy rather than a script-based literacy. The tactile sensitivity, the second colleague who spoke about a blind student, but the tactile sensitivity, the ability to navigate in a tactile way without vision through the challenges of today's world. For those who watch British television, a sort of blind person won this year's Strictly Come Dancing competition. These dancers, ballroom dancers, are so demanding, but to be able to follow these steps and to perform such wonderful dances without being able to see was absolutely astounding. In just a television sense the other day. But the point about distributed cognition is that when we look and judge progress made by societal units or in specific societies or people who work together from across different cultures, being able to put a rocket into space, being able to solve some really complex and challenging 21st century problems such as housing or food security, poverty or transport questions and how we address these is really a collection of minds, a combination of minds that have learned and imbibed different scripts in different historical contexts, in different cultural realities. And it is ultimately the amalgamation of these scripts, not in a formulaic way, but the ability to think with others in a shared way. The outcome of that, we of course judge, but it is the processes of how the solutions are found, how new problems arise, how new answers, new questions arise. That is fundamental to where we go collectively as a world, trying to solve both common and individual problems. So I don't think there's really there isn't really necessarily a contradiction between cultural schemas and scripts and how we learn these and how appropriate they are and what they are, how we move on from them to transform our own cultural practices wherever we are, and the idea of distributed cognition, where I think how we learn through schemas and scripts and so on in our individual societies and practices, ultimately what we're looking towards is a sort of globally connected world in which many cultures contribute to really complex problems that don't affect individual cultures, but affect society broadly. And to the second question, I mean, very well put, and I don't think there's any question at all. And certainly already way back to the 1970s, a couple of cultural anthropologists sort of put very much an important position down that oral cultures are not incapable of formal abstract reasoning. So this was beginning to be a view that was forming in the late 1960s and late 1970s as anthropologists, particularly from the West, went out to societies in the so-called developing world, and when complex abstract reasoning problems were put to adults in that society, who found it very difficult to work with the mode of reasoning that they were asked to work with. They started to make conclusions that actually adults in developing nations are even less capable than 10 or 11-year-old kids in Western society. So that was becoming a very dangerous conclusions that were being drawn about orality versus written cultures. But Gustav Yehoda and others like him started to do quite a lot of experiments where, you might say to two groups, as these experiments were done, of American freshmen versus young Ghanaian adults, a written problem such as here are the ingredients in which to make a bowl of porridge. How much of this or that would you add, and what effect might that have? Versus a question to how many cups of flour do you think has gone into this pot of porridge boiling on the stove? And the conclusion really was that society steeped in oral tradition weren't and are not, in a sense, unable to reason or conclude or problem solve in an abstract way. The point is really that it's the oral cultures versus written cultures is really how if one were to ask somebody who hasn't really isn't able really to read abstract tests very well, to come to a judgment that is steeped in three different sides, if you like, of a complex problem. One needs to be able to read and understand these different perspectives in order to come to some sort of analytical conclusion that takes into account at the same time the different positions being offered in a complex written argument or a complex written analysis. Orality is very different. It is in itself hugely skilled, but depends very much, meaning making depends very much on a dialogue between speaker and listener. And that as we speak, a listener might challenge what we say or ask for clarification. And that allows that communication to take on that particular mode, the toing and froing between a speaker and conversational partner. And a conversation develops. And of course, these conversations aren't confined just to storytelling or description and explanation. They can become really important ways of addressing a problem or coming to some kind of conclusion about a problem. This interchange, this dialogical interchange between speaker and listener or conversational partner, if you like. But it's a different cognitive process to trying to come to some kind of conclusion or adjudication of a matter, say, as a judge listening to a trial or reading papers in a complex trial might come to in the absence of a conversational partner. So the point I was making is not really about whether we value one cultural process or one tradition, oral versus written, more than the other. Both are extremely important, and there's absolutely no doubt at all that in oral cultures, even if they are simply oral cultures where people have not learned to read, there's no question about it that they are capable of complex, abstract thinking and reasoning. But it's the processes of how these are achieved that I think I was trying to underline. All right, many thanks.
Let me take a couple more. There's a lot more questions. We'll go on for another 15 minutes. So just hang on. I think, first of all, just want to ask any of the students at the back, do they want to ask? Yes, you wanted to ask one thing. So please. And then there is, I think, Anusha, there's and there's you. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir.
Can you hear him?
Yes.
My name is Aguila. I'm doing research on socio-cultural anthropology, and my main focus is on education of indigenous population. So my question is, like, in oral traditions, while understanding this oral culture, oral traditions, the fluidity of oral tales and everything is making it more complex in the studies. As a researcher, I find it more like this oral traditions are like more fluid. So how a researcher can approach this oral tradition while understanding a society?
Okay.
One more question. Yeah.
Mhm.
Take Anusha's. So we'll have one more round. So just request you to also
I'll keep
question
it but I was very intrigued by the aspect, and it's a very different question from Akila, sorry. But I was intrigued by the fact that you spoke of distributed cognition, and I've been trying to think about this, where students of today's age, and I'm coming back to that last slide really that you had in your presentation of what is the impact for Kerala's literacy development overall, but school education, where students of current generation and future generations are more accustomed to different devices, their own learning paces, differentiated instructions are now more the norm, and at least we're trying to make them the norm. How does this impact, when they're learning at different paces, learning at different, getting materials at different time zones, how does this impact getting into a shared cognition, which is very important for collaborative problem solving? And is there research that is being done on it? And can you guide us to some of these to think through? That's the question.
Yeah, over to you, David, for those two questions. And then we have a couple more, so we'll try and move it along.
Okay, many thanks. Two brilliant questions again. So for the first question, it's very difficult. Of course, you're absolutely right in saying, oral histories or oral traditions, and if you are trying to research amongst communities where narratives are generated. These methodologies, aren't easy. They look simple, but they're not easy. And of course, for anthropologists and cultural anthropologists, this is what you deal with on for all studies that you do, and there is a skill necessary really to try and if you like, extract from what people say to try and make meaning of that oral dialogue. So it's not as simple perhaps as reading from scripts that people write or other ways of collecting information. I don't think there's an easy way around it. Ultimately, it's down to the skill of the researcher to try and extrapolate and make sense and make meaning from the dialogue that's been generated. There are, of course, researchers that work on oral narratives and storytelling as an important source of information. It depends, of course, on the study, but I don't think there's really a simple answer. It's, as you say, it's just very difficult research, really. I think the second question, yes, society changes, that you can, it's all evident all around you in Kerala and elsewhere. And of course, materiality, some students and families have more access to new tools, new screens, new technologies. So they do have access to information, perhaps at different rates, and information of different quality and different varieties. I think the important thing, I suppose, from the point of view of my talk is trying to understand the school as a social environment in which cultural interactions or social interactions can take place within classrooms, and one would hope that I did a study years ago where one had participants from different social strata in society, and the research was really on a sort of design and technology problem. So I gave students a task where they were to build from a range of low-cost materials in a classroom a vessel that was able to float and carry a cargo of 2 unboiled eggs. So they needed to build a little boat that somehow could propel itself. Some of the lazy groups tied a bit of string to a little boat and pulled it across a small pond of water. Others created some very, very innovative propellers made out of Coca-Cola plastic bottles that were cut into the shape of a propeller, a pencil and elastic band that when it unwound made the plastic Coca-Cola bottle propeller spin, and the boat was propelled across the little pond of water. So for all these children, I actually divided them. I was working on a concept called multimodality or multiliteracies, and looking precisely at how one could bring together young people who were more orally able. They were able to speak very well and to reason very well in their speaking. Those who were quieter didn't say very much, but actually read a lot and understood things and could answer questions in writing, or were able to read instructions and make sure that others in the group understood that. Those with spatial literacies, who, in a sense, saw that, if one built a boat that was too wide or too long, it would be lopsided. Those who were more visually acute, who were able to draw things. So these are all different cultural resources pooled together into different groups within a classroom. I think I could see from that study that it was the importance of pooling these resources. So if the classroom is of a particular, is an environment in which different groups with different acuities, different resources, cultural resources and intellectual resources work together to build or design a product, or indeed design a solution to an intellectual problem, whatever that may be, then I think we can sort of achieve this sense of distributed cognition in a very practical way by managing our classrooms in this way, where we look at the preferences, obviously, amongst individual learners, but also the resources that they have at their disposal, and how that could be used in a joint or collective activity. I hope that makes sense.
I'll take one brief question. I'm not going to ask my own question. And David, just briefly answer that, because we need to go on to the next session.
Sir, I am Shashidhar, Trivandrum-based science writer. And I would like to ask you on why India, being the software capital of the world, unlike the global north. My other question is regarding why we are not yet we are hardly into the hardware, because we lack the quantum photolithography machine. Because even though the government of India lands in quantum mission, we still lack that architecture of quantum lithography. So we are hardly into the hardware. What could be the reason? You said about the oral culture. It is true, because in NASA, whenever our scientists, our techies collaborate creatively with them, they actively put forth their ideas because of the oral culture. And also about the collaborative creativity, it is spurred, it is better made by the oral culture itself. So what could be the reason for India not being a hardware capital unlike the global north? That is my question.
That's a complex question. Did you understand? Did you follow that?
Not everything, no, I'm sorry.
Just succinctly, I think it is India seems to be very good at software. Indians participate in NASA, maybe in Silicon Valley, but we're not a hardware manufacturing country. Maybe, and what could be the reason for that? Maybe quick answer for that.
Yeah, as you say, Sujit, I think it's obviously very complex, and it comes down to national budgets and the materiality for hardware. I don't think Indian culture or Indian colleagues are incapable of building hardware. I think everyone recognizes just this fantastic ability in software and innovation and so on. But hardware, of course, needs money and material and resources and factories and so on. And it's a problem that we've seen over many years and over time in many countries. They understand what needs to be done, but nationally, the budgets for building the canneries or the distilleries, etc., just isn't there.
Okay. So I think we will draw this session to a close, and let's thank Dr. David Johnson for participating from far and for his very perceptive talk. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you.